Ratri Istania, PhD. And we're gonna be followed by Q&A session. And the last one will be concluding remark. We have participants attending offline and virtually via Zoom meetings. Good morning, everyone. But before we start, there are several rules for online participants. First, please make sure your devices have a good and stable connection. Second, you may turn on your camera during the session. And the last one, please feel free to participate. You are free to raise your hand or drop your questions in the chat box. We also open direct questions from audiences attending at the venue. Please feel free to speak up and deliver your questions. In the last session of our lecture, all audiences, both online and offline, are required to fulfill attendance lists. So please make sure the information is correct so that there will not be any problems related to your e-certificate. Well, joining us today are two remarkable speakers. We have here Professor Alex, our international lecturer, and our discussant, Ms. Ratri Istania, PhD. Good evening, Professor Alex. I'm representing NIPA School of Administration, Jakarta. Really show our appreciation for you for joining us today. And we hope everything is fine despite the time difference between Indonesia and Chicago. Professor Alex is the director of the Center for Research on International Affairs at Loyola University, Chicago. Professor Alex's expertise focuses on the studies of international relations, international organization, and globalization. His work on topics of international organizations and politics has been published in books and journals, and his remarkable book entitled The Ebb and the Flow of Global Governance, Intergovernmentalism versus Non-Governmentalism in World Politics has been published by Cambridge University. And also there's another book, Restraining Power Through Institution, a unifying theme for domestic and international politics, published by Oxford University Press in 2023. Well, now it's the time to welcome Professor Alex. How are you, Professor Alex?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we need you to share your experience, your thoughts, including what you have written and explained in your books, because I think it's gonna be a remarkable and delightful presentation, and also sharing about your opinion regarding the topic of the role of international organization in national democratic consolidation. Okay, Professor Alex, you're going to have 15 to 20 minutes to present. Well, time is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Nayo, and thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor. I was in Jakarta back in April. I met several of the professors who are here. It was a wonderful experience. I want to say before I start off with the lecture itself that as somebody who has been working and studying about international relations, this experience, talking to students, to faculty from other countries, from completely on the other side of the world, is a wonderful experience, because obviously, even though we often talk about the same topic, international relations, international organizations, it really depends on what part of the world you are. Our perspectives often differ depending on our experiences. And I want to add to that a little bit about my own experience. I am in the United States. I lived right now a little more than half of my life in the United States, but originally I'm from Romania, from East Europe. and talking to some of the faculty here, especially with Professor Ratri-Stanya that I've known for some time, we recognize many similarities when we don't come from the most powerful or one of the most powerful countries. I would argue that the international experience of coming from a different country, experiencing with other countries as well, is a reflection of exactly what we need when we study international relations. And I also wanted to mention something about my experience because, of course, our presentation, our perspectives are based on those experiences. But not only is it, I do believe that my Romanian perspective matters, but also I must say that from 1992 until 1997, I worked for the Romanian Foreign Ministry. I was posted at the United Nations. I worked in the General Assembly in the First Committee. And that's honestly when I became fascinated with international organizations and hence my research. So with that introduction about my perspectives to understand where I'm coming from, I wanted to make sure that I can now turn to the actual topic of today. And let me do my, okay, let me make sure that I start from the beginning. So the title of the talk is The Role of International Organizations in National Democratic Consolidation. I'd like to start with giving you a better understanding of these two terms. I know that everybody knows what international organizations are. I know that everybody knows what democracy is, but obviously because they're such important terms, there are many nuances and many differences. So in terms of international organizations, I want to clarify that there are two major types of international organizations. The intergovernmental organizations, where governments are represented, they vote, they pay for this. These are the ones we all know. We have formal intergovernmental organizations. And when we talk about formal ones, they need to have headquarters, they need to have a staff that is permanent. Today, we have about 300 of these organizations. The UN is obviously the best known one. ASEAN, the European Union, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the World Health Organization, Organization of American States, African Union, Interpol, the International Civil and Aviation Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization. These are all examples of such formal intergovernmental organizations, the ones we often think about. I need to emphasize that there are a good number, actually more intergovernmental organizations that we consider informal. They do not have headquarters. Their meetings rotate. And I need to mention that especially because Indonesia recently hosted the G20. It is an intergovernmental institution, but it is one that rotates. So is the non-aligned movement. So is the North American Free Trade Agreement. And again, I want to emphasize this because when we think international organizations, these can be very different in nature. And of course, a second type of international organization are the international non-governmental organizations. These are ones where governments are not involved in decisions. But yes, indeed, sometimes they contribute financially. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Greenpeace, Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, BROC. There are thousands more. There are actually many more international non-governmental organizations than intergovernmental ones. I wanted to offer this broad spectrum because really, for this presentation, my focus is going to be on intergovernmental organizations and in fact on the formal ones. So on a subset, but the ones that we really all know more about. Okay, democratic consolidation. We all talk about democracy. We all have an idea of what democracy is. And of course, it is an extraordinarily complex concept. Depending on who you ask, various elements can be included. It could mean free elections, freedom of assembly, association, personal property, freedom of religion, right to life. I'm going to skip some of these. But there's a long list of elements that goes into democracy. Democratization, something important both for Indonesia and Romania. Our countries have gone through processes of democratization. It usually refers to the initial shift from a more authoritarian system to a more democratic regime. This term has become especially important because we think about countries that go through democratization as in waves. There was a first wave long time ago, about 100 years ago. A first group of countries became democratic. After World War II, a second wave took place. A third wave started back in the 1980s. Countries from Latin America, East Europe, Asia. So in the 1980s, both Indonesia and Romania were part of this third wave. The term I'm talking about is neither democracy nor democratization. It's called democratic consolidation. This is the next step after democratization. It implies a longer process, right? When you hear democratic consolidation, it takes time. Honestly, the literature has a hard time telling where democratization ends and where democratic consolidation begins. But oftentimes the interpretation is that democracy is about the big things, the elections, the free speech, the free press. And then when it comes to consolidation, it is about some smaller issues, but but also extremely important. Not just free press, literacy is important. Transparency, access to information. So can you really have free elections when the public does not have the necessary information to make a decision? So also as part of democratic consolidation, there's this understanding that of norms, norms of tolerance, trust in institutions. So it's not just about the institutions themselves. It's the public that has to slowly accept them, use them, understand them. So one of the important aspects about these norms and about democratic consolidation is that it's not necessarily linear. It doesn't mean that always we move towards more democracy, and it's not permanent. I mean, even the United States, with a long tradition of democracy, we all saw I put there 2001, apologies, it should be 2021, and January 6, 2021, there were clear signals that even the United States or other countries that might seem democratic from afar took steps back. So democratic consolidation does not necessarily have to end at some point. It's a long process, and I want to emphasize that. Okay, now that we have these two terms, international organizations, when I talk about intergovernmental organizations primarily, and democratic consolidation, what is their relationship? And the literature has several connections between these. There is a process through which international organizations promote democratic institutions directly. The most well-known process of this happening is called conditionality. And the traditional examples of conditionality are, not surprising, within European-based institutions. The European Union, NATO, are often examples. Countries like Romania, like Poland, like Hungary, when they joined the European Union, there were conditions in place. You cannot join the European Union until you have these types of democratic institutions, until you have a free press. There are conditions in place. We don't want corrupt countries. That is what they mean by conditionality. NATO is an interesting example. NATO requires of all its members that the military be controlled by civilians. Civilian control of the military is a condition that NATO applies to new members. This type of connection is what the so-called realism in international relations talks about, right? Powerful countries, the ones that are members already of NATO, of the European Union, telling smaller countries, if you want to join us, if you want to benefit from these organizations, you need to apply certain institutions and certain norms. That's kind of a clear example of how international organizations promote democracy. But honestly, it's a very narrow process only in certain institutions. More common, also kind of a direct promotion of democratic institutions, is what we would call either encouragement or shaming. International institutions are the places where you have treaties, protocols, and there are a good number of international treaties that are promoted by international organizations that are truly about democratic consolidation. So, for example, within the UN, there are instruments such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on Corruption, which is a relatively new one. So what happens is that these institutions, these treaties are adopted, And then there's a pressure on states that are less democratic, that have not consolidated their democracy, to truly embrace the mechanisms involved there. I put in parentheses constructivism because this is another theoretical approach in international relations. It talks about norms. It talks about convincing, how some countries are convinced by others to adopt all these forms of institutions. So all of these, both these mechanisms are what I consider to be direct promotion of democratic institutions. There's a second mechanism in play, so-called socialization within democratic norms. So to summarize what's actually written here, here's what happens. I mentioned to you that I worked as a diplomat in the United Nations. It's a very different experience to work as an official in a government institution back in your capital, in Bucharest or in Jakarta. But once you become part of the foreign ministry, once you go abroad and you work in an international organization, you start negotiating, you start speaking to people who are not like you, to people who are from different cultures, have different ideas. You as a diplomat are shaped by your interaction with them. If you negotiate for 3, 4, 5 years, most diplomats are abroad for a number of years. By the time they come back to their country, they're not the same individuals. So that is another important aspect. There's several authors who wrote a great deal about this. John Peavyhouse, David Burse, and Stacy Bondanella. They measured and they show how officials coming from less democratic countries, once they start negotiating, looking for negotiated solutions, become more tolerant. There's a give and take, and through these individuals, when they come back, ideas about democracy also are promoted. So that's a second important mechanism through which this happens. The third one, which I want to talk about, and I did more research, is what I consider increased transparency due to an alternative information paths. And I don't want to get into the theory of this unless there are questions and answers, but essentially there's a theoretical approach called liberal institutionalism that emphasizes this. Let me explain to you what I mean by increased transparency due to alternative information paths. This is, if you want, how information flows in the international system. I'm not sure if you can see this, but essentially what I'm talking about is governments offer some degree of information to society, domestic transparency. How much information is the Indonesian government giving, the Romanian government, the Thai government, the Belgian government? Some governments are more open, more transparent, obviously important for democracy. Some are less so. But what my research has shown is that there's a different type of transparency, the so-called external transparency, II, the information that governments offer international organizations. And obviously, international organizations, whether it's the World Health Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ASEAN, they request information from governments and governments offer it. So this is the second arrow. Well, here's what's been happening. International organizations themselves have slowly, over the last 20, 25 years, become more transparent themselves. They offer information directly to society. They have public information offices. They tell the public, here is what is happening. The United Nations is now talking about what's going on in the Middle East. The information that the United Nations is giving societies all around the world is very different than the information that specific countries are giving their public, whether it's the US, whether it's Israel, whether it's China, or other countries. So my argument really is that as governments are giving more information to international organizations, this has been happening over the last 20, 25 years, this external transparency, and as international organizations have themselves become more transparent and giving more information to the public, there is an alternative pathway of information from governments to society. It's alternative compared to the one that comes directly from governments to society. And this alternative path to information has become extremely important. So essentially, as I said, IOs are becoming more complex, more intrusive. They want increasingly more information. Think about all the information that the World Health Organization was trying to gather during the COVID pandemic. International organizations need national information. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all of these, they gather all this information and more so, and then they release it to the public. So if governments do not open up to the public themselves, I argue that they experience crises of trust, scandals. Let me offer a few examples of this. In Bulgaria, a country in East Europe that borders Romania, there's a nuclear power plant, Kozloduy. The government said, oh, it's safe, don't worry about the safety of this nuclear power plant. But the European Union said, oh, yes, you should worry. Here is the information that we received from the Bulgarian government. There are big problems. This was very embarrassing for the Bulgarian government, right? They were offering one information to their public, the EU was offering a different one, and they saw essentially that their government was lying to them. Crisis of trust. How do you resolve a crisis of trust? How can you make others believe you once more after you lied? Well, you promise never to lie again. So that is what they did. They adopted in 2000, immediately after that scandal, a freedom of information law, a law that basically said from now on, here is how we're going to offer information. It's going to be much more direct. The same thing happened in bordering Romania, my country. There was a cyanide spill and it was an accident. And again, the Romanian government said, oh, it's not a danger. But in fact, the cyanide went into rivers. Many fish died. The agriculture was destroyed. And the government would said, oh, not a problem. Don't worry. We have it under control. The United Nations Economic Cooperation in Europe organization challenged this information. They offered, again, from the Romanian government, they offered to the public the real information. It's a problem. It was embarrassing for Romania. They adopted a freedom of information law almost immediately in 1999. South Africa, there were a lot of press reports that it was selling arms illegally, and it denied it until the United Nations said, look, this is how many weapons South Africa has been selling to all of these countries, challenging that information. It was embarrassing. South Africa adopted a freedom of information law. Thailand, a country not far from you. Obviously, the financial crisis in 1997. There are a lot of stories. The International Monetary Fund, I'm not going to say that it did a good job or a bad job, but it offered a different type of information. And because of that, a lot of the things that the Thai government mentioned were challenged by the International Monetary Fund, and the public believed a lot of what the International Monetary Fund was saying. And again, freedom of information law. So that is what I'm talking about, these two different channels of information. If the government doesn't offer enough information, is not sufficiently transparent, then the public still finds out about this through international organizations. Let me give you an idea. So freedom of information laws are a very good example of how easy it is for the people to access such information. Before 1988, there were only 7 countries in the world that had such legislation. By 1995, that number doubled. By 2001, it doubled again. And now by 2023, it more than doubled. There are more than 50 countries in the world right now. Indonesia, by the way, adopted its freedom of information law in 2008. I argue that there are many factors that lead to transparency, to greater access to information. But this is one of them, that international organizations are not just a place for people to meet and negotiate. They receive a lot of information, they release a lot of information, and it's very hard for governments to hide that information. Such freedom of information laws were not just adopted in new democracies. Germany and the United Kingdom didn't have freedom of information laws. Similar processes, they adopted them in 2000. There are many other types of legislation, not just freedom of information laws. Transparency implies other instruments, ombudsmen, laws in the environmental realm, obligations to report. Many states have adopted them. So bottom line, these are my conclusions about what I was talking about. New democracies and even old ones become more open due to their connections to international organizations. Let me offer an even broader conclusion. The membership, the work, and information coming from international organizations alters domestic politics. They're not two completely separate realms. It's not the international realm here and domestic realm. They are connected in part through such information. Obviously, this topic warrants more research. I have been conducting research on this for a long time, and I am interested in continuing this research. And basically, I'm going to end there and thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Alex, for such a delightful presentation and fascinating arguments. You give us a very global perspective, what happened in Romanian government, the United States government, Asian, even Indonesia, South Africa, Thailand, and so many others. But before we begin, interesting perspective of discussion from the audiences, we would like to get another point of view to elevate our understanding. So I welcome another sharing from our discussant, Ms. Ratri Istania, PhD. She is an associate professor at NIPA School of Administration and the head of the undergraduate program of State Development Administration, NIPA School of Administration, Jakarta. She got her PhD from Loyola's Political Science Department in Chicago, and her publications are remarkable. She has published her research in reputable journals such as Asian Journal of Political Science, Southeast Asian Studies, Taylor and Francis, also The Conversation. Her recently published book is Territorial Change and Conflict in Indonesia, Confronting the Fear of Succession, published by Routledge in 2023. Good morning, Bu Ratri.
Good morning, Nayu.
Okay.
Good morning, Alex, and good morning, everyone.
Yep. We currently have more than 150 participants joining us in the Zoom meeting and also live streaming at YouTube. And good morning, everyone. Well, Bu Ratri, you have 15 minutes to deliver your points of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Nayu. I'll stand up. So, okay, can you still see me and hear me clearly? Just to check. Okay, great. So thank you, Nayu. First of all, I would like to take this very precious opportunity to say thank you so much for participating in this event. This event is co-hosted by Polytechnic STLN Jakarta, University of Pajajaran, and University of Brawijaya. And I would say thank you so much for KRIA, Center for Research on International Affairs, Loyola University, Chicago, and the director here. We have a privilege to host him as our lecturer. Again, this is a very rare opportunity for us to have kind of international exposure and having you as an expert that's already has a vast or immense experience, not only in the academia, but the previous experience as a diplomat working in international organizations also probably can inspire all of us. The path that you're taking and why you decided to now working as professor. So that's kind of interesting to me. And this event that brings me a memory a while ago, taking your class, Alex. That's very tough class. International organizations, that's one of them. So now forgive me if I kind of like forget what you've been given in the class and not deliver it appropriately. You can always say, rather you fail. All right, then let's start. So my presentation's about the bouncing back. Why I said the bouncing back and why we rely on international organizations. Because we know that now all around the globe has been witnessing the decline of democracy. Talking about democratic consolidations, I'm taking this from Linz and Stepan. This is from a political science perspective. So what are those democratic consolidations required? First, the existence of civil society playing a check and balance role to monitor government actions. Second, the existence of the political society as the main actor in the success of democratization process in a country. Third, the principle of rule of law as a way to actors to gain power. Four, the state apparatus itself that uphold the democratic kind of values. Fifth, the existence of an economic society means there are like a very active society, private, and then working throughout the governments and also the society itself to promote the democratic norms and values. Next. However, we know and learning from the history of how the membership in international organizations itself, sorry to say, that probably not all the members of international organization, and it's been studied so far, there are different varieties of members. There are already democratic countries, the one that's going to be democratized themselves, and also the country that's already there, whether they are authoritarian or non-authoritarian countries. Indonesia itself has a history of promoting this non-alignment movement. In 1955, Indonesia's held this Asian African conference with India also and with Pakistan and Egypt and several other countries in the global south that they resist the blocks. Means that the 1960s or 1950s and 60s Cold War, they don't want to be allied with either of the parties. So this is a turn that Indonesia and other countries wants to tell that international organizations or alignment probably doesn't work. Everything that based on realistic kind of like idea perhaps won't promote the democratization. In 1960s, so this is one of interesting turn that Indonesia, since its membership in the United Nations, the governments through the President Sukarno at that time, the only state so far, other than the one that you explained, the United States wants to withdraw from the United Nations, especially in the Human Rights Council, right? So in 2021. Indonesia decided and threatened to withdraw the membership from the UN. In Indonesia, at that point of time, is under dictatorship. Because at that time, Indonesia has a tension with the Malaysia, and the UN wanted Malaysia to be seated in the Security Council. But then that's one of the case that Indonesia decided to get out from the United Nations because it has a problem of trust. And then the current trend, especially now, there is this global turn to non-democratic kind of like turn. And then disappearing of non-alignment movement because maybe the global south, we've already losing trust of international organizations, especially the United Nations. And if we are seeing now where Indonesia and several other countries in the global south, we are we don't want to be aligned with either the multipolar world, especially dominated with USA, China, and perhaps now Russia. We want to be in every single kind of like power, and we don't want to lose our advantage of having a good relationship with them. So there is this term fence sitting or hedging strategy amidst this multipolar world. Next. So you discuss about realist and constructivist, but having learned about the international organizations, the very matter of how you influence others, in my opinion, is still calculating based on the realist perspective. I kind of have a doubt about this constructivist kind of like paradigm that one of them argue about the flow of informations can push countries, especially the non-democratic one, to democratize power and money. They are still play dominantly in international organizations. Next. So what we can see in here when we talk about the global turn to undemocratic kind of like government, Indonesia itself, according to VDAM electoral democracy, it has been declining in terms of democracy. And we can also see in the region, especially in the Southeast Asia region, like how many countries in there that's also been threatened by this democratic decline. I mean, this is the global turn. Next. So when you're talking about a formal IOs and informal IOs, I just want to give the audience perspective on how Indonesia as a developing countries as a member also of formal IOs, and then the member of also informal IOs, and how Indonesia still democracy, but according to VDEM, according to the other indicators of democracy, is already not democratic. Since 2009, Indonesia fell into this category of low democracy, according to Freedom Institute. Next. So the membership of ASEAN itself, I'm not pretty sure. Indonesia has been successfully served as the chair of the Asian meeting ended in September 2023. We just passed that event. So Indonesia's the region largest and democratic leader promotes cooperation and governance best practices. However, each Southeast Asia country has its own approach, and Indonesia doesn't pressure others to impose information flow laws for democracy. Instead, it engaged in diplomatic dialogue for regional stability. Things that happening in Asia itself, especially confronting countries, Cambodia, Myanmar crisis, and Vietnam and Thailand, so they are under the rule of this military. Asian as an international organizations operating in regional kind of like way, it cannot push other countries to open its information and be more transparent. I mean, what happened in Myanmar, while the country is using this kind of constructivist approach to push them to open their government and provide information for humanitarians humanitarian aid, for instance, it's just impossible. Next. So yeah, we can just skip this. Just want to give audience the sense of Indonesia has the total GDP, largest total GDP shares among those other country member of ASEAN. Skip. Okay, so this is an illustrations on how Asian cannot really push for democratizing Myanmar, because it also confront with this kind of realist kind of a tension or rivalry between the major economy and major power, China and the US. Look at how divided countries in Asia, the one that pro for sanctions and other using kind of like support arguments of promoting dialogue, creating norms that is supported under constructivist perspective. Next. So what about informal IOs? What we've done so far, we already also successfully, next. We are the chairman also of the G20 past meeting or forum in 2022, and we've done it successfully in terms of it was an event that was held by the only Southeast Asian country that's been performed this kind of like a forum so far. So we are proud of it. However, because of the informal kind of like arrangement in the G20 that's operated like a club, and there is no kind of like pressure or binding agreement after the declarations already like issued. These kind of organizations also cannot really use your argument to push, especially the chairman, Indonesia as a chairman itself, to push other countries. For instance, Russia is as one of the member of the G20 to open up their informations so we can, as a G20, pressure them. Remember, G20 has also G7 and has also those parties that's involved in the Russia and Ukraine war. So that kind of events also prevent a G20 to operate at its maximum capacity to push or to let Russia understand democratizations is a norm that you should uphold. Next. So challenges to democratic consolidation, the counterfactual analysis to information flow argument. Next. So my reading, well, this talk pushed me to open my materials from your classes. So taking from that, I would like to provide another or alternative kind of perspective, especially related with the democratic consolidations. So this is arguments taken from Post and Lenin in 2015. So things that can contribute to country democratic consolidation. The first one, reversals include economic performance. So better performance of economic performance, then they will likely to democratize or consolidate the democracy. And then wealth and previous military rule change to the civilian rule. And then the last one, combinations of economic performance and previous military rule. However, they argue that while IOs can promote democratic consolidation, they are unable to prevent authoritarian reversals in transitional democracies. Next. And then there is also a problem if we're talking about the constructivist argument. We're also talking about how the bureaucracy involved in the government itself, the member of the cabinet, policy analysts, and also the problem within the IO itself, how IOs operated by this line of bureaucracy that perhaps, like I mentioned, now becoming more democratized, but not all of them democratized. We can still see in the United Nations, for instance, Security Council, still dominated by these 5 members. And those 5 members, they don't agree to each other to resolve conflict, for instance, in Gaza. So this just to give perspectives also how the members divided their attitudes to Russia, which is non-democratic. Then next. No? Okay. And these also to provide illustrations how countries, members of the United Nations, also divided in terms of how they recognize the existence of the Palestine can also contribute to how they respond to Israel. And yeah, the problems of the legitimacy of the governments within the domestic spheres also, I think, matters. All right, so hopefully I'm not going too far, but the bottom line is I kind of like having a doubt. I'm sorry to say, Alex, about the flow of information, especially now. The world seems still to be dominated by the realist perspective. And I don't know whether the society that's more open using all the digital kind of like way of transferring information can effectively tackle the issues such as one in now we are facing in Gaza and Ukraine. Thank you so much. That is all for now.
Many thanks to Buratri for the fascinating perspective. I and all the audiences from Indonesia, I think we find out that Indonesia is a democratic country, but it doesn't really perform democratic consolidation, even though in practice we have experienced managing the formal and informal consolidation during the G20 and Asian Summit. It's kind of interesting discussion, but before we begin another Q&A session, I invite all participants to take a picture with the speaker. So please turn on your camera. You may give us your best smile. I need help from the committee to taking a photograph. Okay, I'll give direction. So it's going to be the first slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, next page. One, two, three. The third page. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the fourth page. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think the committee will help taking another photograph. Well, I open discussion for all the audiences who attending virtually or in the venue. You may raise your hands. Having a question ready in the chat box. Or there are 3 questions.
Do you want me to read the questions in the chat box, or do you want to do that?
Okay. Oh, two questions, Professor Alex.
Okay.
You may allow to respond directly while we're waiting for another questions at the venue.
Sure. So I'm going to read the 2 questions, and then I want to make sure I make a clarification to explain exactly what I'm discussing to make sure that we're not going in different directions. So the question was, it's quite intriguing, as the conflict in Palestine raises and international bodies like United Nations are unable to prevent war or urge to cease hostilities? And in your opinion, did international organizations still serve necessary purpose at the beginning they built? And the second question is the role of international organizations in stopping war, as they don't have coercive power to do binding agreements to the conflict countries, even UN. The realist and constructives in theory, also security dilemma theory cannot explain it well. Okay, so let me start. There are multiple clarifications here that need to be made. In terms of Ratri's comments, what I am talking about is one factor that contributes to democratic consolidation. Of course, the literature emphasizes many. In my first slides, I showed that there are dozens of factors that contribute to democracy. That's one. I'm looking at the international factors and the role of international organizations. Second of all, I mentioned that there are three different processes through which the literature considers that international organizations contribute to democratic consolidation. I'm not talking about the realist one. I'm not talking about the constructivist one. I'm talking about the liberal institutionalist one. I'm talking about an alternative path to information. I'm not going to get into the values of constructivism or realism. There have been literally thousands of books written on this. But the way I see it and what I want to emphasize is that it's like saying, what causes a car accident? And I believe it's speed. I believe it's drinking. I believe it's, and you can come with not paying attention. You can come with a lot of factors. And somebody can say also weather, the rain, makes it more likely to have a car accident. In a similar way, I acknowledge, like all the literature, that there are many factors that lead to democratic consolidation. There are many international factors that lead to democratic consolidation. Of course, wealth is one of them, or of course, civil society is one of them. Again, thousands of books have been written on this. I'm adding one more. That's what this is about, and what it's about is really how international organizations are requiring, and I want to emphasize, there's a difference between the so-called intergovernmental approach to intergovernmental organizations. A lot of the discussions, the two questions that I'm receiving and the questions by Ratri, they all mention names of countries. Here's what the US is doing, here's what Russia is doing. That's one story of international organizations. The other part of international organizations are their bureaucracies. That is why I emphasize the difference between formal international organizations that have bureaucracies and informal ones that do not have them. The bureaucracies are the ones that collect information. It's their role. Just like domestic bureaucracies, a lot of what domestic bureaucracies, a Ministry of Health, a Ministry of Finance, they collect information. That's what intergovernmental organizations do. So that is really what this topic is about. And now to answer these two questions, it's really, the questions are rolled into one. Are international organizations really helpful? Well, I think the answer is, what would a world without the United Nations look like? We had that. That was called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was established to end all wars like World War I. And great powers did not want to join. The United States didn't want to join. Germany left. Italy left. Japan left. The Soviet Union left. And they weren't talking to each other. And a lot of people argue that World War II started precisely because of that. So nobody expects international organizations, intergovernmental organizations to resolve all conflicts. Of course they're not. Of course Russia and China and the US have very different views. But we have an organization that sometimes, rarely, resolves some conflicts. It's just like the police cannot resolve all crimes, but you want a world with some police, some crimes resolved, rather than one where it isn't. It is a realist world. I do agree with Rotary. Of course, power matters. Of course, the world is very different when Russia and the United States and China all agreed, like back in the 1990s. And of course, the world is very different. But to answer this question, power matters. And when the great powers, the most powerful countries agree, we are going to resolve more conflicts. When they don't, it's a sad time. And that's where we are right now. So that's kind of my broader response to these two questions. And I'm going to, oh, okay, those were the two questions. Right? If there are any more, I can continue and build upon that too.
There are questions from the audience here, Nayu.
Okay, thank
There are
you.
4
Principal.
questions. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Okay.
Okay, I need your help, Ratri, to manage
Okay, hang on.
question there. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Check.
Yeah.
Morning.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Alex.
Hello.
Yeah, we have our meet. It's second time we meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a question. Okay. We recognize that international organization actually play a crucial role in maintaining the peace and promoting democracy. But now I'm wondering what international organization still have dedication and power to maintain the peace and power to promote democracy. Especially there is a humanity problem that is in Gaza, Palestina. Democratic reform is not only extended to the entire country. However, international organizations also require reform. My question is, what is the guarantee that the financial power of international organization membership will continue to keep them independent and neutral? Because Ibu Ratri also says about the lack of money. And the second question is, what type of monitoring should be designed to ensure the reform and openness of international organizations themselves? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Olia. I need you to fix your camera because we can't see your face there. Yeah, thank you. Well, now, Professor Alex, you can answer the question.
Thank you. So here's my analogy. So the first question is really, and again, it goes back to the question of what international organizations can do. I need to be very clear about this. International organizations are not designed to promote democracy and democratic consolidation. We do not have international organizations whose purpose it is to make other countries more democratic. It's as simple as that. We have international organizations that are supposed to promote health, the World Health Organization, to promote education, United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural Organization, to promote food and agriculture, and so on and so forth. There is no international organization that's supposed to promote democracy. Countries cannot agree on this. That's why we do not have it. They do not agree on the importance of promoting democracy, obviously. So the mechanisms that I talk about are indirect mechanisms that lead to greater democratization. And one of them is indeed exactly what Alia mentioned, related to the information that international organizations are offering. Another comment is, again, related to the first two questions and to this one as well. You ask, what can our international organizations do to? Well, international organizations, what they do is what the most powerful states let them do. If Russia or China or the US don't want an international organization to do something, any one of them can stop it. That's the way they were built from the beginning. That's why there's a veto in the Security Council. So it's almost like saying it's almost like asking what can this group of people right here, how many there are right now in the room, what can we do as a group? Well, it depends on us individually what we want to do. It's not the group, it's us individually that need to promote something. When powerful countries want international organizations, when they all want them to be effective, to do certain things, they can. They've been effective in various issue areas. Some of them might seem minor ones. Relief after hurricanes, relief after a tsunami. Countries agree on those things. On some things, they simply do not agree. And then you have the question of monitoring. Who monitors these international organizations, whether they're transparent or not? Well, really, there are not a lot of possibilities. It's either governments or non-governmental organizations. Some governments support greater transparency of international organizations, others do not. There are a number of non-governmental organizations that do monitor. So to kind of put a broader spin on everything, all these theories that we're talking about, whether it's realism, constructivism, liberal institutionalism, they are all more recent theories, because the original theories of idealism that were promoted back in the 1920s and 1930s have quickly disappeared. We are unfortunately, or a little bit cynical. That's what realism means. Powerful countries are going to do what they want. The question is, do international organizations help even when powerful countries, sometimes when powerful countries don't necessarily want something to happen? Do they have a life of their own? And that is what this topic was about. International organizations offer an alternative path to information, whether great powers want to or don't. Let me offer one example of this. You all remember the Chernobyl disaster back in the mid-1980s, right? At that time, the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev wanted to maintain the secrecy. He did not want to tell the Russian public that there was a disaster of the nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency, an international organization based in Vienna, had all the necessary data because the Soviet Union was obligated to give it its data. And the International Atomic Energy Agency, because of this flow of information, told Mikhail Gorbachev, we're sorry, but we need to make this information public. So Mikhail Gorbachev at that point decided to tell the Soviet people, we have a problem. Before that, he did not say that. It is this very narrow mechanism that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about broadly democratization, democratic consolidation. I'm talking about an alternative form of information. And even the all-powerful Soviet Union or the all-powerful United States cannot escape this mechanism. So even powerful states, even though they do pretty much what they want to in international organizations, we look for these exceptions. And this is one of those exceptions when things happen, even when powerful states don't want it to happen. The UN disagreed with the United States when the United States told people in the US, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. And the UN inspectors went in and they said, no, they don't. That had a tremendous impact on the United States, because here was an international organization, officials from the UN, from many different countries, who basically told the American public, your government, the George W. Bush government, is lying. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That is the mechanism that I'm talking about. And it affects all states, whether weak or powerful. So hopefully that answers more of these questions that I'm hearing. But if there are more, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for another perspective, Professor Alex. We've talked quite a lot about international policies, I think, international and domestic perspective among developing nations, and the ones underdeveloped nations with different power, different perspective of international policies. But despite many challenges and debates about democratic consolidation discussion, I think we no longer make another round for Q&A section with Professor Alex because it's gap between Indonesia, Jakarta, and other places in Chicago, United States. So please, you enjoy your time to take relax, and you're free to go to leave the Zoom meeting room. Thank you very much for your kind sharing. May we meet again in another collaboration. Thank you and good evening, Professor. Hello?
Alex? She already left? Already left? Okay. Yeah.
Ratri?
Oh, she's left already. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I thought that he's probably going to stay to answer more questions, but yeah, that's okay. So
Okay.
we still have a couple more questions, I guess, Nayu. And yeah, it's only me that's probably going to answer your question. So I'm trying to do my best to respond. So please.
Okay, we have one question from Miss Daisy Ernawati,
Oh yeah.
representative of
Um,
the UNDP. It's
Taking one question from the audience here first, and then I'll answer Ibu Des.
okay.
Okay, first let me introduce myself. My name is Arli Gita Ramadan from State Development Administration. So I want to ask if Indonesia, if during the political year, we will find some practice that can be said to be less ethical in democratic practice. We call the practice as money politics. The practice of money politics has become a common culture in our society. This practice allows someone who is incompetent and has large financial capital to be elected because they can pay for people's choice in politics. Meanwhile, those who are competent and do not have capital, they have no chance of being selected because this practice. Maybe this is one of the reason why Socrates hates democracy, because the people with lack of knowledge about the real meaning of democracy, they can be easily to manipulate by the unresponsible political figure. So the question that I want to ask is, what can international organization to intervene the cases of money politics which have become a culture in Indonesian society? That's all. Thank you.
Check. Can you hear me? For the audience inside the Zoom. Nayu, can you hear me? Because I'm changing my microphone. Hello? Anyone respond from Zoom? I'm trying to respond to the question from the audience. So the questions related to what type of international organizations that we can rely on in terms of how one government less committed to democracy, right? And how to control about the money. Is it circulate?
Pakai bahasa Indonesia boleh gak sih? Ya, intinya kan kalau di negara kita kan masih ditemukan banyak praktek politik uang gitu, Bu. Jadi kan eh, praktik politik uang ini bisa jadi salah satu kelemahan dari praktek demokrasi di negara kita. Karena kan rata-rata masyarakat kita tuh tidak memiliki pengetahuan demokrasi yang mumpuni sehingga mereka gampang dimanipulasi sama eh, figur-figur politik atau politisi yang tidak bertanggung jawab seperti itu, Bu.
Halo, halo Bu Ratri. Tidak ada suara, Bu.
Unmute. Check. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So the question from the audience, what's your name? Arli. From Arli is talking about the democracy in the domestic sphere, right? Democracy in Indonesia particularly. So when we're talking about the domestic politics and we're talking about the international politics, that can be two different kind of like approach. So based on what Alex already said and share the knowledge to us, one of the variables or the parameter that we can use to increase democratic consolidations is through the international organization. So the international organizations will help countries that is not democratic yet or already democratic but experience democratic declining, such as, well, Indonesia is already kind of like study as is becoming more towards the authoritarianism, right? But then when we're talking about the domestic politics and talking about how people perceive about democracy itself, there are more complexity that perhaps international organization cannot really do much to change the perceptions of Indonesian people. It's about how Indonesian people learn that democracy can increase their wealth or not. And there are several others kind of like indicators that why Indonesia is becoming more toward this kind of like a democratic declining. And I think one way that we can take from what Alex just said to us about the three different way of how the flow of information can increase democratic consolidations. One of interesting part is using society itself. So societies itself learning from international organizations, norm and values that more democratic than the previous past, then it is depend on which layer of Indonesian people, right? The one that they could educated, not educated. So that's kind of like more complex. But learning from, oh, okay, international organization, we are a member of this international organization, either Asian, G20, or the UN itself as like the biggest kind of international organization. They still promote democracy. Why don't we promote democracy in our own country? So the society itself can do such a movement instead of relying on the government, our government itself. The thing that we can do is this movement created by the civil society that understand that democracy is the norm and value that can make us sit as one of the valuable member of international organization. We have the capacity to be heard. So that's one way that we need to trust ourselves. And by trusting ourselves as a community, we can pressure our government to democratize. More democracy should hopefully lead to a better international relationship between countries. And then we'll hopefully avoid war. Because, well, there is one way of explanation. If you're democratic, then you'll be more peaceful. But that you can argue about it. Yeah. Okay, they probably should answer also Ibu Desi's questions, right? I mean, though, what's her question? Let me read her questions. So, question from Desi Ernawati. She works at in UNDP. It is very interesting when you discuss about Indonesian foreign politics is relatively stable. However, if we look our domestic politics is relatively volatile, especially ahead of election time. In your opinion, what the government should do to make a democratic process still on track and maintain? So yeah. So again, I should probably repeat from what I've already said earlier, that Indonesia is not a unique case. So Indonesia turned to more undemocratic kind of like government. It is not unique among cases. I've already presented to you and give you illustrations on Indonesia among Southeast Asian countries that we are now kind of like not different with others that's already also experiences democratic decline. So how we should maintain or increasing our democratic norms that should also be adopted and transferred or applied to our government system. I think one way to approach it, I should probably make myself clearly that we are not, I mean, our foreign politics, I'm not saying that it's relatively stable, but we're trying hard to make it like stable, because we have we are facing a different kind of like political international kind of like power. Those previously America or United States as a unipolar power, now becoming multi-polar powers, means that it's not only in America or United States, but there's China, there's also Russia trying to dominate the global sphere. So Indonesia cannot say that I will align with one or the other, because Indonesia has this neutral kind of like foreign policy. However, why I mentions about the fence sitter, it is a different type of a non-alignment movement. Fence sitters is individual states decide for themselves that they should take advantage among this global kind of like rivalry. So instead of only relying to the US or having this bilateral kind of like relationship with the US, but it also having a bilateral relationship with China and also perhaps Russia, because we don't want to be excluded. We want to be taking advantage, especially for the economic kind of like term. And then we need stability in our own regions. So having those two powerful countries and maintain the balance and not to align to one sides and another, I think that's how we approach. And another thing, Budesi, I mentioned about the society. I think society learn from the international organizations how they becoming more transparent and more democratic. That way it can also signal or provide a message to them. So using this kind of like movement to pressure the government to be more democratic, maybe that can be effective, maybe.
Well, thank you, Muratri, for the response. We're still waiting another feedback, comments, questions from audiences.
Yeah. There's 3 questions from audience.
Wow. Maybe for the participants from University of Brawijaya, University of Pajajaran, we're reading your exciting comments. We're gonna end the session until 10 a.m. I think it's still 9:25.
Hello? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Good morning all. My name is Grace Simanjuntak and I'm from Stialan Jakarta Polytechnic, majoring in State Development Administration. As we know, promoting democracy in other countries can be a challenging task for international organizations. Each country has different characteristics, both in terms of its government system and so on. So what challenges do international organizations face when promoting democracy in other countries, and what solutions are being implemented? And does the current country status, such as a development country, a developing country, or an underdeveloping country, affect how they become a democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. So Muratri is going
Thank you.
to
Yeah, thank you
comment.
for your question, Grace. So the challenges of international organizations to consolidate democracy in countries, especially the member countries, right? We know that there is a global trend of democratic decline. And also we know that the member of the international organization consists of those that's already democratized themselves, or others that perhaps want to democratize themselves, or they're the one who's not democratizing at all. So already members of international organizations, they have different characteristic of varieties. In that way, how they approach to their domestic politics and international politics may be different. So this is one challenge for international organizations, that the membership is countries. However, Alex already said to us also about the problem of the bureaucracy that operates the international organization. The UN, for instance, Asian, for instance, those formal international organizations, they have secretariat, right? They're the one that run daily operations of their business. And those people, they have their own problem of coordination, problem of communication. And also, when we're thinking about organization, there is this unit probably most powerful than others. And then the staff that work as officials or bureaucrats, they're not coming from one nation or from country. They're coming from different parts of the world as well. That's not necessarily democratic. So that's one other things that the international organizations need to confront, Grace. So problems, yes. And then how they can consolidate undemocratic countries, that's one other challenges, because the first thing that maybe they need to do is to convince the society within that country itself to push or pressure the government to be more transparent. When we're talking about Myanmar, when we're talking about Cambodia, that's been dominated by one authoritarian regime, can you do it? Until today, the problem hasn't been resolved yet. And when we're talking about the Palestine and the war in Gaza, for instance, look at the Secretary General's house, or they call him condemning Israel for doing such atrocities in this community in Palestine. What can he do so far to represent countries, members in the United Nations to condemn such thing? Do they follow? Do Israel follow? They don't. So this is one way of thinking. Israel is a democratic country. That's according to the Freedom Institute, for instance. However, in terms of their approach to this kind of like crisis, is not democratic at all, right? So what should the international organization do? This is kind of problematic. That's why my questions to Alex proposal or arguments, whether these three kind of like way of opening communications, opening information, the flow of informations, though we have already ratified it, can democratic countries that already ratified that kind of law, let's also be able to promote such democracy? There's still a big question. Yeah. There is one question, Nayu. I read it from the screen.
Okay. It's from University of Pajajaran.
Yes. This is a questions about why does every country always hope for politics with a democratic system, even though in reality, democracy always experiences shortcomings in several ways. Okay. Mas Habib, thank you for the question. So this is becoming the questions that recently being asked because why people now seems not trusting democracy anymore, because the democracy itself, well, it is not an ideal type of a governance system or a political system that we can really trust that it will bring welfare as it promised. So what I can say about democratic systems today, because it probably it failed to deliver its promise. So people thought when they facing the authoritarian phase of their government back in, for instance, monarch kind of like political system, the tyranny of the or the dictatorship of the king, because there is the defined right of king. The king has absolute power, and people's getting sick of being ruled by this kind of like tyrant, and they want the system that can replace it, and makes them more valuable uh, as a individual. So democracy offer a promise. Now it sets as utopian because it failed to deliver the economic prosperity, for instance, especially in the global south. Democracy just make people more suffer. And then there is this oligarch that's becoming more rich, and people's getting sick about that. So that's why maybe we should change the democratic system. So this is not unique at all, because there is this cycle. People getting sick of one political systems and wants to change with the other one. And there's going to be like that. The problem is, how low would you like to go? If you don't trust democracy, what type of other government system that you would like to adopt? So we've already suffering from 32 years of dictatorship, right? 32 years being in authoritarian governments. Well, we don't have like freedom of expression. We cannot sit here and discuss about our government. We cannot condemn other governments because there is always this information being closed by our government. Or would we experiment with the type of political system that never exist in our country? And in other countries also already failed. So what choices do we have now? Do you want to replace it with another political systems that you never experienced? Especially you're a Gen Z, right? I've been in authoritarian type of dictatorship system back then. And I certainly feel that today is better than that period. However, we also understand that democracy is not necessarily bring more job, more welfare to you. We need to work things out. We cannot just hope that democracy will just drop something in front of you and you get it. It's a process. That's why the democratic consolidation takes time. That's what, according to Alex, it takes time. And hopefully you will choose a better leader that can fulfill proportions of the dream. Not entirely. All right. Okay, that's probably, yeah, that's so far that I can explain.
Okay, interesting feedback from Burati. Maybe we open for another round of the discussion session. We're still having 25 minutes ahead until 10 p.m. At 10 a.m. I'm so sorry. So please, for the audiences, put attending in the virtual room and the venue, you can
There are
participate.
questions. There are questions from here.
Okay.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
My name is Anhar. About our topic, the role of international organization in national democratic consolidation. I have a question. How do you think about the role of United Nations for national democratic consolidation? If we look at the case of Russia in Ukraine and Israel in Palestine, and what are the challenges and opportunities for United Nations in supporting democratic consolidation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anhar.
Thank you for the questions again. This is a real time event, the crisis that is happening in the in the Ukraine, and about the Russia aggressions to Ukraine, and also the current Palestinian that's being attacked by the Israel, and then creating this kind of like well, this is genocide, but it is also for the Western countries. You may see that how many are those that says it is genocide. So there is a problem there. So if you would like to see the compositions of countries supporting or not supporting one country to another or party in conflict, you can also tell how those kind of like compositions also operates in the international organizations level. So when you're asking how can UN do in such way to promote democratic consolidations while its member committed in such atrocity or such conflict, that perhaps it can be prevented because those countries, they are democracies. But this is the core questions, I guess, that we need to ask about the relevance of international organization and whether this liberal institutionalism can work to prevent the war that can emerge into maybe the war that we don't want to face, like a total war, for instance. The number of parties involved in the conflict itself increasing, right? So what I can say in here, there are such challenges for international organizations to respond. While we are looking into the members of international organization, we cannot avoid to see the compositions of the membership. The compositions of the memberships also can tell us whether these are powerful countries or not powerful countries, and how the decisions makings being made. The UN, especially those are the one that serve as a member in a Security Council. They are the one who decide things. Those 5 permanent members of Security Council, for instance, Russia Federations, and then the United States, and then Britain, and French. Like how many have I mentioned? So those 5 members, including 10 non-permanent members, right? Indonesia is not included in this period, in this term. But how everything's decided based in the power, money, powers like the authority that they can assert to decide things. So it's still based on those countries. Those countries has alignment with one another, right? Like Russia and China, they are aligned together. And then these other countries, France, Britain, and then the United States, for instance, they are in one other camp. So can you imagine like how difficult it is when it comes to the war that those countries supported or not supported? And then those decisions in the Security Council, for instance, may be more complex if you carry that to like larger member of the United Nations uh, kind of like assembly. It is hard. It's only shaming, naming and that's it. But there is no pressure for countries such as the one involved in the war to follow what the United Nations want, democratize or stop the war, for instance. It's problematic. Am I answering your question? Yeah, please.
Okay, do we have another question there, Buratri?
Yes. There are two other questions. Oh, go ahead.
Test.
Yeah.
Good morning, Miss Ratri. Thank you for the chance for me to ask a question. Now I wanna ask about evaluation. As we know, evaluation is the one of important thing must be to be done to measure the success or failure of organization goals. And now, as we know, in this world, that has many country that still fight for build and consolidate their democracy. As we know, that Russia, Ukraine, and Palestine. And my question is how to evaluate the effectiveness of the role of international organization to helping the country in build and consolidate their democracy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Awalia, for the question.
Okay, I'll try to answer it, but probably it will not be the one that can the answer probably not going to be the one that satisfy uh, uh, your questions though. Evaluations of international organizations. So the questions is becoming complex if we are talking about who decide to enter the international organization in the first place. So if those members dominated by powerful countries then be evaluated by international communities. Whose international communities that going to evaluate them? Those countries can say and just said, oh well, because we are being evaluated as bad actors for international actors. I don't give a damn. We are still there. Or okay, I'm going to stop funding for these international organizations. What are you going to say about that? There's not going to be UN anymore. That's the problem of League of Nations back then, right? So there are a lot of things that we need to understand from international organizations itself. If we're talking the membership, we're talking about sovereignty of a country. Sovereignty of country. Indonesia is a sovereign country. We are independent, but we are member of international organization. When we are a member of international organization, we interact with others. And we interact with one another is based also on how our positions among those countries. Like in the G20, for instance, I experienced of like sitting there and watching how Indonesia as one of the developing countries that serve as the chair of the G20 back in 2022, Indonesia used its leverage to help ease the tensions. Although G20 is not meant for political or security kind of like um, a solution for countries that are involving in war, right? G20 is for the economic growth, but we are trying to convince those countries, especially the one involving in a crisis, to stop the crisis. But we can do to certain extent to convince them to stop, but we are not able to stop entirely. Within the forum itself, there is these tensions, and the tensions is also influence the declaration, especially the one that I'm working with, the employment working group. So yeah, I think it's difficult to say like how. It's depend on the membership. It's depend on which one is play most of power and also money in that organization. But the thing that back to what Professor Alex already said, maybe there is this alternative explanation that we can use to consolidate democracy across the globe. One way is those countries that's already adopted that flow of information law, those countries that we can rely on to democratize IOs. IOs democratize the society, and society can pressure the government should the governments becoming more undemocratic. So probably that can answer, but not all the way satisfy your question. One more.
Wow. So we have
the
one more
audience.
question.
There is one more questions, Nayu, from the audience.
Okay.
Hello. Hello, Buratri. Good morning. Thanks for the change. I'm Shakila from NIPA School of Administration. In addition to Israel and Palestine war, there is also the Yemen war that began in 2015, and it's still going till right now. The war persists because there is a conflict of interest related to the fight for state power, and there is also supply from the powerful country in the form of like weapons and material. The United Nations and other IOs have taken steps to stop the war, but however, they were category unsuccessful in stopping it. My question is, what is the explanation or maybe factor for the failure of these international organizations' efforts? Thank you.
Thank you, Shakila. Again, this is a very difficult questions, right? I mean, my questions is going back to my argument. Are we relying too much to international organizations in this multipolar world? Should we turn into bilateral instead of relying too much to the IOs? Because if we are studying the IOs, what's inside the memberships is also the intricacies of the bureaucracies, the relationship within the staff and the units, and then the hierarchy of the leadership within the international organization is probably will add to the complexity of the problem. So instead of having a decisions like unified decisions from one particular international organizations, it's already failed since the beginning of the international organization try to solve the problem itself. And remember, the international organization, they don't have arms, right? Arms means guns and everything else. So that kind of like militaristic power, you cannot stop the war without convincing those parties involved in war that you have power to stop them. So that's kind of like realist perspective from international relations. So the thing that I can do instead of using constructivist argument, that's creating ideas that war can suffer people, kill civilians, and not reaching the democratic goal. The one that Alex offer is to push from the societies as well, to push that kind of like liberal institutional kind of like approach that you can work things out, not only from the government, rely on government to democratize, but you can work it way through the open or flow of informations, increase the transparency of the international organizations, and then that can also the idea can be transferred to the society. I don't know how that can be work effectively today, but I'm looking for another explanations as well, though. So why the conflict is still ongoing, and why we see that the most powerful countries like align with one kind of like group, and there's another like kind of like align with other group, and it's a proxy war. Proxy wars means that the war that it is not like directly from the countries that would like to engage in war, but using other countries as a proxy, and the war itself there, we can tell which party support which government, especially in the Ukraine and Russia, which countries that align with Ukraine, which countries that support Russia. So, yeah, I mean, how to resolve it through international organization? Well, it's, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's hard to answer. There is this pessimistic kind of like perspectives as well that I'm taking from one of my, not him, not Alex, other professor that says, don't be too idealistic now, because this is a cycle. All the countries today needs to face the reality that the world probably needs to turn into that kind of directions. But learning from the past, how to not repeating what the World War I, World War II, and the Cold War has already damaged the international kind of like realm. So I don't know. Okay.
Well, thank you, Buratri. Do you have another questions at the venue?
There is one question here actually from the screen from Unpad, yeah. If the contribution of international organization in democratic national consolidation decreases and does not meet expectation, what impact will this have on the development process in various countries? Okay, so this is this is the reality. This is the reality that we all must face today. The economic development maybe can be not heading to the directions, especially that we expected. And we see the crisis in the US, and especially the inflations that's been severely impacted countries that previously, before COVID-19, they are in a very good and stable, but now COVID-19, and after COVID-19, Ukraine and Russia's conflict, and then now is followed by the Gaza crisis. Everything will impact the economy. So this is not per se the international organization's job to consolidate democracy, but there are other things. The state actors that involved in such crisis, maybe they are also the one that contributes to the declining of development process across the nation. And now we are seeing that the global South is the one that's probably suffer a lot from what's going on in the European theater, the conflict that's happening in the Middle East, for instance, because like Shakila just mentions about the supply chains. Indonesia still depend on importing products from other countries, and we are not yet fully independent to and I don't trust about the countries being very independent, because we are in the international kind of like relations that we cannot work solely with our own sources. So yeah, democratic consolidation decreases and does not meet expectation. The impact is severe because bilateral can work in such way, but we need. I still believe that having the multilateral interaction through international organization can help to some extent, but not everything can be solved in that way, especially seeing the parties or the members of international organizations that involve in the crisis that can contribute to the declining of a development and also democratic process, unfortunately. Okay.
Okay. I think we have reached our end of session, what I think. Do we have another question?
There is another question, so one more.
Okay, one more question.
Not the one that too difficult yet to answer. You should
Two?
probably leave it to Alex and then write a note to him and then answer your question. Go ahead. Yeah, go.
Good morning. My name is Rafia Widedani. Thank you for the chance. So I want to ask a question about the political dynasty. So based on several news articles I have read, there are still countries that practice political dynasty. As we know, political dynasty create opportunities for corruption. For example, in Indonesia, there is a well-known corruption case involving the political dynasty of Ratu Atut, who was the governor of Banten. The political dynasty in Banten started with Ratu Atut becoming the regent and bringing her family into politics, such as her husband, her son, and her sibling who also joined politics. Eventually, it was discovered that this political dynasty had engaged in corruption amounting to 17.9 billion rupiah. They were accused of corruption and bribery involving the chairman of the Constitutional Court with a sum of 1 billion rupiah for handling election disputes. From this example, it can be seen that political dynasty provide opportunities for corruption and can lead to abuse of power. Considering this, how do international organizations respond to cases of political dynasty, and what roles can they do in eradicating political dynasty to prevent the problems such as corruption? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So I have to make myself clear that we need to probably separate between what happening in domestic politics and what happened in international kind of like realm. However, there is a slight connections that we can draw from whatever happening in our own country, and also how our expectation international organization can interfere and also help us to, for instance, your expectations, no more political dynasty, for instance, like that. So one way of explaining this, there is, again, country has its sovereignty. Sovereignty means that no other countries can intervene whatever happening in one country's political and government development. So in that way, international organization will find a hard time, or even other countries, to say no political dynasty in Indonesia, or no political dynasty in Philippines, or no political dynasty in whatever countries across the globe. It is very hard. Nobody can change Russia. Nobody can change China and make them more democratized. China is still ruled by one single party. Russia now becoming more authoritarians due to what Putin's and its regime is trying to do in his own domestic politics, and also what he's been doing to other countries. So that's kind of difficult if you're talking about that country has sovereignty, and so you cannot violate country's sovereignty. You means the international organization. But there is this norm, democracy. There is the norm, the anti-corruption. There is the norm, freedom of expressions, that everybody sort of like agree that this needs to be upheld for not turning the world into authoritarian leadership. Authoritarian leadership, as we learn from the history, remember, we need to learn about the history first to know the difference between how people live in democratic and not democratic kind of like society. If you're only learning from what today's development, we cannot get anything from democracy because of today I cannot eat in a better way, or my lifestyle is like decreasing now because of democracy can provide me with those kind of like luxury. So I don't think that's fair enough. You have to learn from history what past can teach you or instruct you. That's according to Snyder in 2017, by the way. So learning, for instance, what the what Hitler has been done, what the apartheid has been suffering peoples in South Africa, what the Indian caste system has suffered, like the marginalized people. Do you want to repeat the history in that way? Those kind of like in authoritarian leadership, those not democratic leadership. So maybe after learning that and see the international organization that's upheld that norm, hopefully through what Alex has already are make that kind of like argument, maybe that can work. We rely, but not too much, to international organizations to democratize one country. But in order to do that, international organizations need the society help. So the society that believe democratic norms is still important. It's not the one that can be replaced with any other. Well, provide us with explanation how that other system can better substitute of democracy. If we still if we still believe in democracy, then the society's movement will be very substantial. So in that way, we cannot really rely too much to international organizations, but we can also make international organizations learn how to be more transparent, and the trend is they are more open, according to Alex, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that is all that I can explain to you. Okay, Bunayu.
Okay, so there is no more question for today's discussion. I think we finally meet the end of our lecture session. And the concluding remark Bu Ratri said it is clear that international organization facing internal and external challenges, global challenges in managing democratic consolidation. There are political, geopolitical, economic, military aspects, and they are really complex. The formal, informal international organization must uphold professionalism, as our audiences said that we need accountability, we need evaluation to promote peace and equal and sustainable development for all nations. Well, all the participants, I think if you still have questions and feedback, please reach us in Instagram Poltekstialan Jakarta and our email account polytechnic@stialan.ac.id or our WhatsApp contact that it's Instagram, the simple one. Thank you for all the participants, our partners from University of Brawijaya, University of Pajajaran. Thank you for the spirit, the appreciation, the partnership. Thank you for the comedy. And I think we need to discuss again in another academic forum. I hope this kind of interactive blended academic discussion will enrich and elevate our knowledge regarding the role of international organization in managing democratic consolidation. Well, I represent my colleagues at institution, NIPA School of Administration Jakarta. Feel so sorry for all the shortcomings, and I hope to see you again in another chances, opportunities. Stay healthy. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you so
Assalamualaikum.
much, Nayu. Thank you so much, everyone. I've already shared my PowerPoint presentations in the PDF file. So in case anybody would like to have it and discuss it further, please feel free to download it.
Oh yeah, once again, please don't forget to fulfill your attendance, please, for all the audiences, because we are going to give you electronic certificate for today's event. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, everyone. Good morning.
Nanti lecture yang lain itu Brawijaya. Jadi udah memberanikan diri berbahasa Inggris dan sebagainya.